During our class videos, you may hear our poets and playwrights use terms that are new to you. We have created a list of key terms and definitions that you can refer to at any point during our video lectures. This list is available on the Videos and Readings class page, where you can read it or download it as a PDF. If you would like to find and review these terms while you watch each class video, you can stop this video, go back to the Videos and Readings class page, and download the PDF. There you can play this video and each of the following class videos. If you have any questions about these terms, we encourage you to ask your teaching team in the weekly class discussions.
Art Borreca is Associate Professor of Dramaturgy, Dramatic Literature, and Theater History, co-head of the Playwrights Workshop, and head of the Dramaturgy program at the University of Iowa. He has worked as a dramaturg with a number of leading theater artists, including Athol Fugard, Wole Soyinka, Theodora Skipetaris, David Goddard, and Naomi Wallace in such venues as the Yale Repertory Theater, New York Theater Workshop, La Mama, Oxford Stage Company in the UK, and TPT, Theater Project Tokyo in Japan.
Okay, well, my name is Art Borreca. I am an associate professor of theater arts, and I'm co-head of the Iowa Playwrights Workshop, which is the MFA playwriting program at the University of Iowa. And connected with that, I'm also co-head of the MFA Dramaturgy program, which is a program that might require some explanation as we go along here. If you're teaching anything about dramatic structure, you end up going back to Aristotle's Poetics. Or, like a lot of writers do, you go to Aristotle's Poetics and then throw it out. But still you go back to Aristotle's Poetics because it's been so influential. I mean, there's a saying that the history of Western philosophy is a footnote to Plato. It's all a footnote to Plato. And in a sense, this whole story of dramatic structure, the analysis of plays is very much all a footnote to Aristotle's Poetics. Because he was the first one to kind of set out a kind of fundamental theory for how a play, from his perspective, ideally should be written to achieve a particular effect. He talks about tragedy, and I should say that a lot of what he says about tragedy over time has gotten extracted and abstracted into principles for drama in general. This is where kind of Aristotle is the birthplace of dramatic analysis, because the he gets very technical about how a tragedy should be put together, and the things that he says about tragedy in terms of how it should be put together really are the kinds of things that you see even today in new books that are coming out as we speak about how to write a play, how to read a play. A lot of the same basic principles are repeated. Tragedy for Aristotle was a kind of play that dramatized the fall of a character from a high position to a low position. Because of, he says, because of a mistake of great weight or consequence. I think the Greek term is hamartia, Hamartia, and preferably concerning blood ties, something having to do with family relationships that you discover along the way. Three things there: the fall from high to low, the mistake, and blood ties. The idea of the mistake has over time been turned into this notion of a tragic flaw, which I think is problematic because I don't think Aristotle was thinking about it in those terms. I think the tragic flaw idea was more of a latter day, to some extent Christian, and then later a kind of modern psychological idea of what is it that's inherent in the character of this individual that caused his or her downfall, right? So Oedipus suffers his tragic consequence because he's too proud. Or Macbeth suffers his consequence because he's too ambitious. You know, it has to do with a particular kind of character analysis that we like to do. We more modern, postmodern people like to do. But I don't think Aristotle's thinking about that. He says mistake. Mistake. It's something that the character has done in the past or in the present that leads to tragic consequences. And it has the implication that it could happen to anyone, except that in this story is exemplary. This has happened to this individual in a particularly awful way, so that we can kind of experience that. And as Aristotle says, both pity this character, feel sorry for this character, but also feel empathy, but also fear, hope this doesn't happen to me. His preferred play, of course, one of the problems we have is that he refers to a number of plays that we don't have anymore. We can't read them and compare his assessment of them to what he says about them. But the play that he favors, as he talks about tragedy, is Oedipus Rex. Where the downfall from high to low is illustrated in the case of a man who has become king of Thebes by virtue of having solved the riddle of the Sphinx and saving the people of the land. Because he did that, that's all in the backstory, as we say now, in the past. Because he did that, he became king. At the point at which we meet him in the play, the people have come to him, represented by a chorus of elders. They have come to him to ask for his help with a plague that's on the land. And he being very much a savior of the people and taking pride in that, has already sent Creon to the oracle at Delphi to find out what can we do about this. And that's where some of that sense of, oh, he's really proud, and let's read it from that perspective. That's where that partly that comes. He's got an attitude. In terms of form, we're talking about meeting this character who sets out to accomplish something, and in a way repeat his past success. He's going to be the savior of the people again, right? And then he's confronted with a crisis, which is that Creon comes back and says, we must find the murderer of the previous king. What the oracle says is you have to find the murderer and rid that individual from the land, exile that individual, purge that individual. And then the plague will go away. And Oedipus says, I'll do it. The investigation leads to himself, so he encounters clues along the way that he picks up on, and he follows and he pursues. And as he pursues them, there are people in the play like his wife Jocasta, mother of his children, who says, don't go any further, Oedipus. And ultimately we learn that there's good reason for that, because she figures out at a certain point that what he's also going to figure out is that not only has he murdered the previous king, but that she is in fact his biological mother, and he has slept with her and borne children. And so the awfulness of it goes beyond just having been the murderer of the king. So from Aristotle's perspective, this is a good example of tragedy because you have the fall from high to low. It's very plot focused. Aristotle talked about tragedy having 6 elements: plot, character, thought, diction or language, music, and spectacle. And he was very focused on plot. Plot was the most important thing. And what is a plot? According to Aristotle, a plot is the imitation of an action. So he really liked Oedipus because plot has to do with the events being structured in a particular way, but in being structured in a particular way, it's representing an action. In this case, the action, we would say in modern terms, using, say, Stanislavski, theorist and great theorist and teacher of acting, we would say his super objective is to find the murderer of Laius, and that really guides his action. Everything flows from that. And the events are all structured around that main action. Other important elements of a plot and of a dramatic action in Aristotle's terms include a change or a reversal. That's the fall from high to low. Something changes dramatically, tragically. There is also a particular type of reversal that he calls a peripety, which is a reversal of expectations especially from the character's perspective. So I expect to rid the land of the pollution. I expect to save the land again. I expect to find the murderer, only to find that I am the murderer. So there's a particular point in the play where a messenger comes in and says, where is Oedipus? I have news for him. I have good news and I have bad news. I like to parody this when I teach the play to undergraduates. I have good news, I have bad news. The bad news is your father has died. The good news is you are now king of our land. Congratulations. And then Oedipus is like, oh, what a relief. What a relief. This means I didn't kill the previous king. But the messenger says, well, not only do I have this, good news and bad news, but you don't really know what you're talking about, because your father was not really your biological father. Doesn't use those terms, but he was no kin to you in blood. Essentially, you were adopted, right? So this becomes another clue that he follows, which ultimately leads to discovering that he, in fact, murdered his biological father and slept with his biological mother. So there's a peripety. This was all about peripety. It's a peripety scene. The messenger comes in expecting to give good news, bad news, but there is a reversal in there, which is that it becomes all awful news. Similarly, there's a scene earlier in the play where Jocasta says, Oedipus has had a heated scene with Tiresias, who basically says, the man you're seeking is you. You're the one who, essentially, from the beginning, says you're the one who did it. And Oedipus is outraged and decides that Tiresias is conspiring with Creon. And Jocasta comes out. It's the first time we see her, and she says, why are you squabbling with Creon in front of the people in this undignified way? And he says, well, he's conspiring with Tiresias. Tiresias said this about me being the murderer, et cetera, et cetera. And Jocasta says, oh, you shouldn't listen to prophecy. Let me tell you a story. And the story she tells is a story about a prophecy that she and her previous husband were given, that they were going to give birth to a son who was going to do awful things to them, right? And in the course of telling that story, she refers to the husband, who is the previous king, being killed at a place where three roads meet. And Oedipus goes, what did you say? A place where three roads meet, right? And he pursues that clue, because he in fact killed somebody at a place where three roads meet. And so it turns out that she thinks she's going to assuage him, she's going to soothe him, but instead she gives him a piece of awful information that contributes to the tragedy. So the plot, if you follow it through, starting with, I'm going to solve the murder and rid the land of the pollution and be the savior once again, but that action runs up against these particular obstacles, which include clues that come up that he pursues. A lot of them are built around these smaller reversals, where a scene is structured around what we would call what Aristotle would have called a peripety, a reversal of expectations, where characters think one thing is going to happen, but something else happens instead. The other thing that's important is that all of this, the events in the tragedy, and one of the reasons Oedipus is the great model for Aristotle, have to be what he calls firmly compacted. They have to be structured so that there's a sense of one thing causing another, causing another, causing another, causing another. A sense that you can't take anything out without the whole structure falling apart. And I guess this is really where we get into the craft question. It needs to be preferably climactic. That is, all of that leads to a single scene or moment. And in that moment, you have, from Aristotle's perspective, ideally, you have a revelation. And the revelation from the character's perspective is one of the truth of my birth, the truth of the murder that I committed, the truth of I've slept with my mother and born children by her, and this is all pretty bad. It's that revelation. So it's like technically what is revealed, but it also comes with a sense of revelation of something bigger. And this is where the audience comes in, is what is being revealed about kind of the nature of human fate, the place of human beings in relation to the gods and the cosmos. What are we learning here about that? So it has that broader sense of revelation as well. So a good tragedy, abstracted from that, a good drama is neatly plotted, carefully plotted, so that one event leads to another, to another, to another, in representing a dramatic action, preferably with a central character, a protagonist, who is seeking something, but gets something else instead. And in that process of reversal has insight, revelation, discovery. And there's a broad sense of consequence of, what does this all mean? So that's kind of the model of dramatic structure that Aristotle offered. Other things that he said about it that I should mention is he talks about it should have a beginning, a middle, and an end. One of my favorite parts of the Poetics, which I always like to read aloud, is where he says, "What is a beginning? A beginning is the part that before which there is nothing, and after which there is something." And the middle is the part that comes after the beginning and before the end. And the end is the part that comes after the middle and after which there's nothing more. Words to that effect. And when you read this, especially in like an undergraduate script analysis class, the students go, "This is ridiculous. Of course, a beginning." We know that he's describing something that's readily apparent. Why is he doing that? And I always try to emphasize that he's saying it for the first time. No one else has said this yet. And he's looking at a play and he's basically saying, you have to start it somewhere. It has to begin somewhere. Now, where you begin it is very important. Later, critics sometimes refer to where a play, the plot begins as the point of attack. That is, the story of Oedipus, if we told it chronologically from beginning to end, from the birth of Oedipus to the last moments of Oedipus Rex, leaving out that there are two more plays, by the way, after Oedipus Rex, which is part of a trilogy. That story is something that Sophocles could have attacked at different points. He could have started it earlier. He could have started at the place where three roads meet, the murder, right? But he starts it specifically when there's a plague on the land. He's already solved the riddle of the Sphinx. He's the savior of the people. There's a plague on the land. The people are seeking help. He starts at that point, which is fairly late in the story, so we call that a late point of attack. And then moving forward from that, the past events that are important, that are significant, kind of come to bear on the present day actions. The beginning is the beginning that is carefully chosen by the playwright to take us through that action of, I'm going to find the murderer. What's the beginning, middle, and end of Oedipus? In one sense, it's I'm going to find the murderer. I'm going to do it. I'm going to rid the land of the plague. I'm going to save you again. That's the beginning. The middle is, uh-oh, there's some bad news here that I got to look into. Really, I'm still going to save you, right? Stick with me. I'm going to save you. But let's follow these bits of evidence that we're getting. Then that leads at the end of the middle to, you could say it's like the end of the middle to the climax of discovery. And then the end is what comes out of that. It's what do we do now with this king who has, oh, by the way, did I mention that he blinds himself? A well-known part of the story. So once he discovers what he discovers, he goes off and off stage, he blinds himself with a brooch from Jocasta's gown. And then he comes back out blinded and bloody. And here we have the end, which is kind of the tragic consequence that comes out of everything that was in the middle, that was the events leading to discovery. So there were two things there. One was beginning, middle, end, that Oedipus is saying, you have to think about a beginning because a beginning has to start somewhere. Then you have to think about how the middle flows out of that. Then you have to think about how the end flows out of that. And then you have to think about what is the point where you stop, where things terminate, as it were. And in Oedipus Rex, we stop with Oedipus begging for exile from Creon, who is now king of the land. So he wishes upon himself the thing that he was going to be administering to the murderer of Laius when he thought that murderer was somebody else. The blinding can be read as a kind of, self-sacrifice. It's a purging that he's doing of himself, giving up his sight because he's seen something so terrible. And that's part of the whole process of, begging for exile from the land. And in a sense, ironically, it's all about irony, right? In a sense, he does save the people, right? In the end, he does save the people. It's just not in the way that he had thought he would.